and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. We'll start with a check of the top headlines this hour. BNP expresses confidence in forming government after landmark poll. Opposition says won't engage in obstructive politics. World leaders congratulate Tariq Rahman. President Trump warns Iran of a very traumatic outcome without a nuclear deal. He expressed hope for progress in the next month following his White House meeting with Netanyahu. North Korea vows a terrible response to any further drone incursions from the south. Seoul denied official involvement in the January incident, attributing it to civilians. Officials announced the conclusion of the immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. A congressional hearing reviewed ICE's presence, while a judge ruled that detainees were denied access to lawyers. Obama says U.S. is less safe after Trump reverses Obama-era ruling that greenhouse gases endanger public health. The White House called the reversal the largest deregulation in American history, saying it would make cars cheaper. U.S. President Donald Trump says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should receive a pardon for corruption charges, saying Israeli President Isaac Herzog should be ashamed of himself for not granting one. Russia fully blocks U.S. messenger app WhatsApp owned by Meta Platforms for failing to comply with local law, suggesting Russians turn to a state-backed national messenger ahead. NASA set to launch 4 astronauts to the International Space Station, replacing a crew that was evacuated early due to a medical issue. The pre-dawn launch was delayed by 2 days over adverse weather forecasts across the U.S. East Coast. All right, viewers, we start the bulletin with some breaking news now coming in from the United States. 2 people have been killed and 1 wounded in a shooting at South Carolina State University. The school has confirmed the incident took place in an apartment at the Eugene Suites student residential complex. The university issued a campus-wide lockdown at around 9:15 p.m. as authorities responded to the shooting. The campus remains on lockdown while police investigate and work to ensure student safety. Well, those are the latest updates we are bringing you, but we continue to track more details and come back on it later. And we now move on, viewers. The U.S. and Taiwan have signed a landmark trade deal to reduce tariffs and boost spending. Under the agreement, U.S. tariffs on Taiwanese imports will remain at 15%, while Taiwan will gradually eliminate all lower tariffs on nearly all U.S. goods. Taiwan has committed to significantly increasing its purchases of U.S. goods, including liquefied natural gas, civil aircraft, and power grid equipment from 2025 to 29. The deal also includes an agreement investment pledge, with Taiwan's companies set to invest $250 billion in U.S. industries. Taiwan will also benefit from tariff exemptions on more than 2,000 products exported to the U.S. Let's first listen in to what Taiwanese President Ching-te had to say.
美国的主要贸易伙伴中，台湾争取到最大幅度的对等关税调降，以及最优惠的232关税，彻底扭转长期以来台湾为和美国签署 FTA 所造成的贸易劣势，也为我们的农业 以及传统产业进军美国市场，带来潜力可观的商机。
Joining me now in this discussion is Andrew K.P. Leong. He's an independent China strategist and joins us from Hong Kong. Mr. Leong, thanks very much for joining us here at NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. How are you viewing this deal between Taiwan and the U.S. at a time when Trump is also signaling closer ties with China with a due visit likely?
Well, this must be looked at from American perspective of Taiwan's usefulness to American interests. The Taiwan relation is governed by the U.S. Taiwan Relations Act which was enacted long time ago. Under the act, the American government has been empowered to continue to supply arms to Taiwan to help to defend itself. But on the other hand, preserving the status quo. And the Taiwan Relations Act opposes any unilateral solution of the Taiwan issue by military means and supports the long-term solution by through peaceful means. But however, another dimension of Taiwan's usefulness is Taiwan is now being increasingly seen as a pawn against China's rise. The idea is to turn Taiwan into a military porcupine, supplying Taiwan with a lot of armament to help to deter any kind of military adventurism on the part of Beijing. But the United States also continue to supply help Taiwan's economy because the another strand of the strategy is to enable Taiwan economically to be self-sufficient and not entirely depend on the Chinese economy. And hence this kind of relaxation of tariffs and other means to help Taiwan's economy must be seen in this particular context.
But how do you see the fact, Mr. Leong, that US is now moving to reduce tariffs on not just Taiwan, but a lot of other partners that it is reliant on? We can talk about India, Pakistan, and of course Taiwan, where US has decreased its tariffs. Also, let's not forget the fact that it also removed the threat of tariffs on Europe, the 8 countries.
Well, as I said, I mean, the Taiwan's usefulness cannot be seen in isolation. The U.S. strategy, under the national security strategy, for example, the United States is pivoting back to the Western Hemisphere. But on the other hand, on the Asia Pacific, the United States continue to safeguard its military and also economic dominance through offshore balancing. Taiwan is one of the dimensions. The other dimension is, of course, strengthening Americans' military alliance with countries like Japan and also even South Korea, and then Australia through the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal, and also India through the Quad arrangement. And as far as Taiwan is concerned, continue to supply arms to Taiwan to defend itself, and eventually turning Taiwan into a military porcupine, but also relaxing on kind of restrictions to help Taiwan's economy. Then the biggest prize, of course, is the TSMC, which is Taiwan's the jewel in the crown of the Taiwan's economy, because the TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation, produces the vast majority of the world's high-end chips, and there are still a lot of American sanctions against exporting these chips to China. High-end being defined as anything less than 3 nanometers and below. Nanometers are millionth of the breadth of a human hair, and these are kind of semiconductor products find itself into a lot of high-tech products, including computers, but also in military hardware. So the Taiwan relations must be seen in this overall context of American strategy in the Asia Pacific.
All right, Mr. Leong, thanks very much for your comments. They're requested to stay on though as we proceed. Viewers, now the US has also agreed to send a small fuel shipment to Cuba after blockading the island's fuel supply. Meanwhile, Chilean President Gabriel Boric condemned the US blockade, calling it a crime and a violation of human rights. Boric emphasized that no disagreement with Cuba justifies harm to innocent civilians, especially children. In response, Chile, another Latin American neighbor, plans to allocate funds to UNICEF to aid the Cuban people. which also urged for the blockade to end in line with the UN General Assembly's repeated calls. All right, Mr. Leong continues to stay with us. He's a China strategist from Hong Kong. Mr. Leong, how do you see this turn of events? Do you see any connection to it to the fact that Mexico was also supplying and had agreed to supply oil to Cuba?
President Trump's military action to abduct the leader of Venezuela and to control Venezuela's oil as part of America's pivot to the Western Hemisphere, but also to control essential oil supplies. And after all, Venezuela is has the world's largest oil reserves. But then the relation to Cuba is that Cuba relies on its energy sustenance from supply from Venezuela. And now Venezuela is under the sway of the White House. So to kill two birds with one stone, by controlling the oil from Venezuela, it also achieved the purpose of weakening the Cuban economy, because Cuba still remains a thorn on the side of the United States. But after this Venezuela situation, and of course Cuba remains an ally with countries like China and Russia, and China and Russia have expressed the willingness to help Cuba. And so this relaxation of some of the restrictions in Cuba is trying to recalibrate the kind of relationship with Cuba. On the one hand, putting enough pressure on Cuba. On the other hand, not allowing or rather decreasing the possibility of a direct intervention, at least in terms of supplies of oil and other resources from China and Russia. Yeah. So it's a very careful, calibrated kind of response. On the one hand, putting enough pressure on Cuba, because after all, it depends on its oil supply almost entirely from Venezuela. But on the other hand, allowing it not to sink into the abyss and getting help from China and Russia as the last straw, as it were. So the whole thing must be read in the context of a strategy and trying to change the regime in Cuba more in favor with American interests, but on the other hand, preventing it descending into such a situation as to attract more robust intervention from China and Russia.
Right. How much can Russia really help? Let's particularly talk about Russia and not China right now, because Kremlin is issuing statements time and again to say it's in talks with Cuba and discussing what help it can offer.
Well, Cuba's economy is not doing very well from to start off with, because it's been under U.S. sanction for a long, long time. Particularly the oil supply is essential for its economy and its livelihood. And by controlling the supply from Venezuela, it really squeezed the living space in Cuba and pushing it more towards its supporters, China and Russia. But under the so-called Donald doctrine, the Western Hemisphere should be out of bounds with its perceived adversaries, China and Russia. So by recalibrating relationship with Cuba, putting enough pressure on Cuba, but not so much as to force it to cry for help from Russia and China, remains to be the calculated strategy at the moment.
All right, Mr. Leong, thanks very much for your comment and for joining us here at NewsX World. And with that, viewers, we proceed. Now, a U.S. Senate has failed to advance a funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security, raising the prospect of a partial government shutdown as temporary funding for the department expires at midnight tonight. According to reports, the procedural vote was 52-47, short of the 60 votes required to advance the bill. The legislative stall comes as the White House and congressional Democrats have been unable to reach an agreement on immigration enforcement regulations following 2 fatal shootings by federal law enforcement officers in the city of Minneapolis. The senior minority leader, Chuck Schumer, has said that the Democrats have been very clear that the Democrats will not support an extension of the status quo. And now we move on, viewers. US President Donald Trump has publicly now slammed Israeli President Isaac Herzog, saying Herzog should be ashamed of himself for not granting a pardon to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is on trial for fraud, bribery and breach of trust. Trump claimed Herzog is withholding the pardon to avoid losing power and urged the Israeli public to shame him. Herzog's office countered that no decision has been made. The Justice Ministry is still reviewing Netanyahu's request, and the president can only act after receiving a legal opinion. Herzog stressed that any decision will follow the law and prioritize Israel's national interest, free from external pressure. Trump has campaigned publicly for Netanyahu since June 2025, including letters and speeches, while Herzog has maintained that he can only consider the pardon in line with proper procedures. Legal experts note that since Netanyahu's trial is ongoing, a pardon at this stage may not even be permissible. The trial, lasting nearly 6 years, is expected to continue for several more, with potential appeals. And let's now track the latest in concern to the Ukraine war. Ukraine's Western allies have pledged nearly $35 billion in military aid for 2026, as per British Defence Minister John Healey. He confirmed that at a NATO Defence Ministers Conference in Brussels. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius announced that Germany is ready to provide 5 new PAC-3 interceptors for Ukraine's air defence, but only if other allies contribute at least 30 more interceptors. This marks a continued commitment from NATO countries to support Ukraine in its ongoing conflict with Russia. Let's first listen in to that statement.
Together, I can confirm at today's UDCG, we pledged a total of $35 billion worth of new military aid for Ukraine. For our part, the UK is spending the highest level of support for military aid for Ukraine ever, and at this UDCG I announced a new £500 million package of urgent air defence support for Ukraine, President Zelensky's top priority.
Ukraine needs, we heard it earlier, at least $60 billion from its supporters this year to defend itself. John, Michailo and I, together with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, have written a letter to our partners last week. We emphatically called upon all countries in the Ukraine contact group to provide additional support. We have seen the result at today's UDCG. John just highlighted it. 35 billion euros are the result.
Let's now welcome Glenn Grant, ex-advisor to Defense Minister of Ukraine, also a geopolitical commentator in this discussion, and joins us from Latvia. Mr. Grant, thanks very much for joining me. Firstly, do these assurances from the Western European allies of Ukraine really boost the confidence of Zelensky and partners?
That's a good question, especially the question of, who are you thinking are partners in this? I think that we're reaching the time where people are actually going to start asking Zelensky what he's actually trying to do internally to change the systems that he has, because they've given a lot of money, huge amounts, with more to come, but there is still urgent need of reform in the defence forces and in the air defence. And without that reform, then a lot of money is going to get not wasted necessarily, but not used anywhere near to full effectiveness. And people seem to be very shy. The politicians seem to be very shy about asking Ukraine to improve what it's doing.
All right, and how do you view the fact that there still continue to be roadblocks as far as aid to Ukraine is concerned? There are already statements that are coming in that one partner would supply this much only if the other one makes up for the rest of the filling gaps.
That is a really good question, because that's a bit worrying when people start to play that, I'll do my bit if you do your bit. All the partners have already pledged to, I think it was 66 billion, for this year. But I don't know whether that was apportioned already of who's going to pay how much. And it's quite clear that there are some countries that are actually putting more into this, more energy, more effort, and more hard cash than some of the others. This is where the EU needs to help, because they're not. Rutte is not going to do anything. He's too weak. But there is a need to stop people even having discussions like this, because a discussion like this from somewhere like Germany just emboldens Putin, because he thinks, right, I've got them. They're beginning to crack, so he just keeps going. Solidarity is the absolute key to winning this war and to get Ukraine off the hook.
And talking about the larger peace question, in your assessment, do you see an agreement being arrived upon by June, as Zelensky says that Trump is intending to?
No, I don't. I don't. It would be a miracle if it does, and I shall certainly, admit I was wrong if something like this does happen. But Russia is still showing no sign whatsoever of easing up on its war, and it's actually inside Russia. They're actually turning more and more and more to a war economy, and if they're doing that, it just says that they're in this for the long haul. So I think peace. Trump's peace is a mirage, and it's not. I don't think it's going to happen at all.
All right, Mr. Grant, we'd leave it at that. Thanks very much for your comments here at NewsX World. Moving ahead, viewers, let's also tell you that Ukrainian President Zelensky has condemned the disqualification of Ukrainian skeleton athlete from the Winter Olympics over his helmet, which displayed images of Ukrainian sportsmen and women killed since the Russian invasion in 2022. Zelensky described the ban as not about peace and praised Heraskev's principled stance, awarding him the Order of Freedom. The International Olympic Committee cited rules against political gestures during competitions, but offered alternatives like allowing the athlete to wear a plain black armband. Herashkev has appealed the decision to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, with Ukrainian fans expressing dismay over the IOC's handling of the situation. Let's hear Zelensky remarking on that.
Ще одне, точно не про мир і не про справедливість і не про принципи олімпійського руху. Рішення Міжнародного олімпійського комітету проти Владислава Гераскевича, нашого спортсмена, який всього лиш пам'ятає і шанує українських спортсменів, чиє життя забрали російські удари. Спорт не повинен бути без пам'яті і поваги.
And viewers, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of the World Report on NewsX World. Very thanks for staying tuned.